All right, so you send in this article, Is India Disappearing?
Yeah.
By Amitabh Priyadarshi.
Yeah.
And, wow, this one is...
intense.
This is a good word for it.
Yeah,
It's incredibly comprehensive. I mean, it covers like everything from global population trends to, the potential consequences of declining birth rates.
It really is. And what's interesting about this is Priyadarshi comes at it from kind of a unique perspective.
Yeah.
He's a communications professional, so he understands how to build a narrative.
Right.
But he's also got this incredible background working with all these humanitarian organizations.
Yeah.
CARE, UNICEF, the American India Foundation Water Aid.
Yeah, it's like real on-the-ground experience.
Yeah.
That really informs his analysis, I think.
Absolutely. He's not just looking at numbers.
Yeah.
He's actually seen firsthand the human impact of these demographic trends.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So are you ready to dive into this dense material with me?
I am. I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, let's get started.
Okay.
So one of the things that really kind of blew my mind
Okay.
reading this was that we often hear about overpopulation, right?
Right.
But Priyadarshi points out that some countries are actually experiencing the opposite, population decline.
Yeah.
How does that even make sense?
So it all comes down to this idea of replacement level fertility.
Okay.
And the best way to think about it is like imagine a forest.
Okay.
And in this forest, every tree needs to produce at least 2 seeds
Okay.
that grow into mature trees in order for the forest to maintain its size, right?
Right.
So that's basically replacement level fertility.
Okay.
It's the number of children that each couple needs to have to keep the population stable.
So if each couple's having like 2 kids,
Exactly.
then things stay pretty balanced.
You got it.
Okay, there's a pretty clear visual.
Good.
So what happens when those trees, or in this case, those couples aren't producing enough seeds?
Well, then you start to see a decline in the population, and this isn't just like a small little thing.
Right.
This is happening on a massive scale.
Okay.
Priyadarshi points to Japan. Their population is shrinking by 1 million people every year.
1 million people a year.
1 million people a year. Crazy. And China's facing a potential population halving by the end of the century because of that one-child policy they had.
1 million people a year. That's a staggering number.
It's hard to even fathom.
Yeah, it is.
But it's not just about the sheer numbers, right?
Right.
It's about what that means for society as a whole.
Yeah.
Think about it. Fewer young people entering the workforce.
Right.
A shrinking consumer base, and then this huge strain on social safety nets because you have this growing elderly population.
Yeah, it's like a slow motion domino effect.
Exactly.
Impacting every aspect of life.
Yeah, and it's not just Japan and China.
Oh.
Italy is a great example. Their median age is now 48.
Wow.
That's another stark illustration of what happens when a population ages and birth rates decline. And even South Korea is facing a crisis. Their fertility rate is just 0.8.
Okay, so we're seeing this trend in a lot of developed countries.
Yeah.
But what about India? I mean, we have this reputation for being this young and rapidly growing nation.
Right. That's what makes this so interesting.
Okay.
Because while India's total population is still enormous, when you start to look at the regional data, it paints a very different picture.
Okay.
Priyadarshi highlights that only 6 out of 36 states and union territories in India actually have a fertility rate at or above that replacement level of 2.
Only 6. I would have thought it'd be way higher.
Right.
Wow.
And this leads to some pretty startling potential scenarios.
Like what?
So take Punjab, for example. If their current fertility rate of 1.6 continues, their population could be cut in half in less than a century.
A whole state's population just vanishing is almost unimaginable.
It's mind-boggling, and it really underscores the urgency of this issue.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the numbers either. He also talks about Tamil Nadu.
Okay.
Their median age is projected to hit 40.5 by 2036.
Okay.
Which means a shrinking pool of young people to support a growing elderly population.
And that raises so many questions.
So many questions.
Like, who's going to fill those workforce gaps?
Right.
What happens to a state's economy when its population starts to age so rapidly?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are just some of the things that Priyadarshi digs into.
Okay.
But before we dive into those, I'm curious, what are your initial thoughts?
Well, honestly, I'm a little shaken.
Yeah.
I always thought India was immune to this kind of demographic shift,
Yeah.
because of our sheer size.
Yeah.
But it seems like we're not as different from these other countries as we think.
Right.
And the thought of entire states potentially losing half their population is, well, unsettling to say the least.
It is unsettling.
Yeah.
And it does raise a lot of questions about what the future holds for India.
Right.
But Priyadashi doesn't just leave us with this sense of doom and gloom.
Okay, good, because I need a little hope right now.
Yeah.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the ideas he puts forward?
So one of the biggest concerns he brings up is this potential for a shrinking workforce.
Yeah. Okay.
And he uses Japan as this prime example of what can happen when you've got an aging population and not enough young people to fill those job vacancies.
Yeah, we touched on that earlier. I mean, they're dealing with some serious labor shortages.
Oh, absolutely. Huge shortages. And one of the ways they've tried to address that is through automation.
Okay.
So think robots, AI, taking over tasks that humans used to do.
Right. That seems like a logical solution, right?
Yeah. On the surface, it seems like a win-win.
Yeah. Less need for workers, more robots to kind of pick up the slack.
Exactly. But Priyadarshi points out some potential downsides.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, widespread automation could lead to a lot of job displacement.
Okay.
Especially for folks in like manual labor or manufacturing jobs.
Right.
And you think about what that could mean for India, where a huge portion of the workforce relies on those kinds of jobs.
That's a bit unsettling.
Yeah, and he also brings up the fact that small businesses might struggle to compete with those larger corporations that can afford to invest in all this expensive robotics and AI technology.
So we're not just talking about job losses.
No.
But potentially a shift in the whole economic landscape.
Exactly.
Yeah, and what happens to those workers who are displaced?
Right.
Can they all just transition to new tech-related jobs?
That's the big question, and it's not an easy one to answer.
Right.
You know, he suggests that while automation might create some new jobs in tech and development, it's unlikely that it's going to fully offset the losses in those other sectors.
Okay.
And then there's the whole issue of retraining and upskilling a workforce that might not have the education or the resources to make that transition.
Right. It's a huge challenge.
It is.
So automation's kind of a double-edged sword.
Definitely.
So what other consequences does he explore?
So he goes on to talk about the potential for a significant economic slowdown.
Okay.
And he uses Italy as kind of a cautionary tale.
Okay.
They were once this thriving economic powerhouse, but their declining birth rate and aging population have really put a damper on their growth.
How has that played out in real terms?
Well, one of the big issues is a drop in consumer spending.
Okay.
As people get older, their priorities change.
Right.
They tend to spend less on things like trendy clothes, gadgets, entertainment.
Right.
You know, all those things that really drive a lot of economic activity.
Yeah, especially in a younger, more dynamic economy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right.
When you're focused on retirement planning and healthcare, you're probably not as interested in the latest smartphone.
Exactly. And this isn't just anecdotal.
Yeah.
The World Economic Forum has actually done research on this. And they found that as populations age, spending patterns do indeed shift towards things like healthcare retirement savings, more essential goods and services.
So what does that mean for businesses?
Yeah.
Especially those targeting younger demographics.
Well, it could spell trouble.
Okay.
Companies that rely on this steady stream of young consumers to buy their products,
They might see a significant decline in revenue.
it's a sobering thought.
It is.
Especially since we're currently benefiting from this demographic dividend with our large young workforce.
Right.
But you mentioned healthcare.
Yeah.
That's another area where Priyadarshi raises some concerns, right?
Absolutely. And this is where he draws this really stark comparison between India and South Korea.
Okay.
South Korea spends about 10 times more per person on healthcare than India.
Wow.
And a big factor is their rapidly aging population.
So is he suggesting we're headed for a similar scenario here?
He doesn't say it's inevitable,
Okay.
but he does point out some warning signs.
Okay, like what?
Remember how we talked about only 6 states and union territories in India having that fertility rate above replacement level?
Right.
Well, he uses Sikkim as a specific example of a region where these demographic challenges are already starting to emerge.
Okay.
Their fertility rate is just 1.2.
Wow.
Incredibly low.
So even though India as a whole has this large young population,
There are these pockets where we're already seeing those same trends towards an aging population and potentially a strain on healthcare systems.
Exactly.
This is a lot to digest.
It is, but before we get too overwhelmed,
Okay.
I want to shift gears just a little bit.
Okay.
What strikes you as the most surprising thing we've talked about so far?
I think the thing that's really resonated with me is just how interconnected all of this is. We're not just talking about population numbers. We're talking about economic shifts, cultural changes, technological advancements, and ultimately how all those forces impact individual lives.
That's a great point. And that really leads us to the heart of Priyadarshi's argument.
Okay.
He's not trying to paint this bleak picture of the future.
Right.
He wants to spark a conversation about how we can adapt and thrive in the face of these challenges.
Okay. I'm ready for some solutions now.
All right.
What does he propose?
So Priyadarshi lays out all these challenges, right? These global trends, population decline, how it's impacting different countries.
And how India may be headed down a similar path.
Yeah, it was a lot to take in.
Yeah. But he doesn't just leave us with that sense of doom and gloom, you know?
Right. Yeah, you said he offers some solutions.
Yeah, he does. He has some ideas.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Okay, so first of all, he acknowledges that there's no quick fix.
Okay.
This is a complex issue.
Oh, right.
And it's going to require kind of a multifaceted approach. You know, something that addresses the root causes of these declining birth rates.
So where do we even begin to tackle something this big?
Right. Well, he makes this really interesting point
Okay.
about looking to the past
Okay.
for inspiration.
Okay.
He says, think about our grandparents' generation. They often had much larger families.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't so common to just have one or two kids.
Yeah.
So what's changed?
That's a good question. I mean, life just seems simpler back then.
Yeah.
Maybe less expensive.
Right.
I mean, could one person's income really support a big family in today's world?
That's a key point that he brings up.
The economic landscape has shifted so dramatically.
Yeah, it's just so much more expensive.
Things like housing, education, even basic necessities.
Yeah, you're right.
It's so much more expensive than it used to be.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents today feel like they're struggling to give their kids that same standard of living that they had growing up, even with smaller families.
Yeah, it feels like that pressure on young families is just immense these days.
Absolutely. And that financial pressure that plays a huge role in people's decisions about family size.
Of course.
So instead of just, telling people to have more children,
Right.
Priyadarshi suggests focusing on policies that make it easier and more affordable to raise a family.
Okay, I like that approach. It's about removing those barriers and creating a more supportive environment
Exactly.
for families. Okay, so what specific policies does he have in mind?
Well, he highlights three main areas.
Okay.
Parental leave, affordable housing, and flexible work arrangement.
Okay, let's break those down.
Okay, so parental leave, he argues that longer and more flexible parental leave options, especially for fathers, could make a huge difference.
Yeah. How so?
Well, it gives parents more time to bond with their newborns,
Right.
adjust to parenthood, and that could potentially reduce some of the stress and anxiety that come with having a baby.
Yeah, those first few months are tough.
Yeah, they are.
So it's about creating space for families to thrive
Exactly.
during that crucial time. Okay, what about affordable housing?
Right. So in many urban areas,
Yeah.
the cost of housing is astronomical.
Ridiculous.
It's a huge burden for young families
Oh, absolutely.
who are just starting out, trying to get on their feet.
Right.
So Priyadarshi suggests that policies aimed at creating more affordable housing,
Okay.
that could really help.
Yeah, alleviate some of that financial strain and make it maybe a little bit more appealing
Exactly.
to have a larger family.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's tough to think about starting a family.
Right. When you can barely pay your rent or your mortgage.
You got it.
So essentially, it's about creating that environment where people feel more financially secure
Yes.
and confident about expanding their family.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then the third area you mentioned.
Right, flexible work arrangements.
Okay.
So his argument is that more companies should embrace things like flexible hours,
Okay.
remote work options, maybe even on-site childcare
Yeah.
to help parents
balance everything.
balance work and family responsibilities.
It seems like that would be a game changer.
Oh, absolutely.
For a lot of working parents.
Yeah, instead of forcing them to choose between their career and having kids,
Yeah.
it's about creating a workplace culture that's supportive of families.
Yeah. I love that idea.
Yeah, and Priyadarshi really believes that this holistic approach, addressing both the economic and the social factors
Right.
that contribute to these declining birth rates,
Yeah.
that's what we need.
To create a sustainable future. Exactly.
For India. Wow, this has been a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I've learned so much about population dynamics and the potential consequences of these demographic shifts.
Yeah. It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, it really is. And it's definitely made me think about the future.
Yeah.
What are we creating for ourselves and for future generations?
It's a big question.
It is a big question. And I love that Priyadarshi doesn't just present the problem, but he offers solutions.
Right.
He wants us to think critically about how we can make things better.
That's what we need more of.
Yeah, it's a call to action.
It is.
What's the one big takeaway you hope people will get from this?
I hope they just start to think about how these trends could impact their own lives.
Yeah.
Their own choices.
Yeah.
Whether it's about starting a family, choosing a career path,
Right.
even where they decide to live.
Yeah.
These forces are shaping our world.
Absolutely. And we all have a role to play in shaping the future. So it's a call to action to get involved and start having these conversations.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Amitayush Priyadarshini's Is India Disappearing? It's been a truly thought-provoking exploration, and thank you so much for guiding us through it.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us, and we'll be back next time with another deep dive
See you then.
into a topic that's shaping our world.